In today's video, I'm going to talk about CFM demand. Oh, wait a minute, we did that. CFM demand part 3. Haven't we beaten this to death? So, in part 1, I was showing how to use CFM demand, like I had for years and years and years. The basic formula that we had has been around forever. When I did so, a person popped up on one of the groups that I belong to and came up with a formula. I thought this formula was out of a textbook. And so I looked at that. That was supposedly what generated this constant in the formula. And I looked over the formula to generate that constant, and I picked it apart. This made the guy very mad, which I found a bit puzzling because I assumed this came out of a book. I redid the formula. This is all in part 2, and reworked it into a new formula and started trying to use it. And it worked way better than the original formula. And I did a video about where it actually shows. It was a much more accurate deal. And so you'd think that'd be the end of the story. The problem I have is I'm a bit of a math geek. And this is going to get a little bit into just mathy stuff. So if you need to tune out, I understand. But one of the problems I had is I plugged airspeed into this formula. And it stuck out kind of like a word. It didn't belong. A formula has to work numerically. And this one was working really well numerically. But it also has to explain something. The values of what it's representing are important. And by plugging in airspeed into here, it confuses this formula. It doesn't make sense. It sticks out. And the reason that is because I don't get to where I need to go. The values of what they are have to add up. In the case of the top of this formula, I have CID times RPM. So the engine displacement times the RPM. What that gives me when I multiply those two together is cubic inches per minute. Okay? But my exit is in cubic feet per minute. And I have nothing in this formula to convert from cubic inches to cubic feet. But then down here, I have several values. The 8 is just reducing it because I want in a single cylinder worth of flow numbers. And the 2 is dividing the RPM because remember we do 2 rotations per complete cycle. So really I need half the RPM. So those kind of make sense. But this is in feet per second. I'm in cubic inches and I'm dividing it by feet per second. That doesn't equate to cubic feet a minute. It just doesn't get there. And that's why this stuck out. It's like numerically the numbers worked. And I showed that in the previous video on engine design. The numbers add up and this worked way better than the original formula. I mean, when I did part 1, I even commented that this I kind of took with a grain of salt. It helps you, but it wasn't super accurate, and I just took it at that. And I've asked people, nobody knows what generated that constant until this guy came up. And I took it at face value. I thought this was from a book. I kind of picked it apart. I thought maybe I had figured out the error in their original thinking and made it better. And it worked. Number-wise, it worked. But that's not a sensible formula. And it bugged me. And that's partly because I'm a math guy. Math needs to be eloquent. It needs to say something. These values say something about how the engine runs. And so I had to look at it better. Now, like I said, my first problem is in this formula, I'm in cubic inches per minute. Inches. I need to convert that to cubic feet per minute. So you need to divide it by 1728, which is just 12 times 12 times 12. That's 1728. And that takes you from cubic inches to cubic feet. That's all we're trying to do is convert it. And so that needs to be in the formula. Now we already talked about the other two numbers. The 8 is because I want CFM for a single cylinder, and the CID up here is the entire engine. So we divide it by 8. And the 2 is strictly cutting the RPM in half because a full cycle is 2 revolutions. So we really only need half. And you go, well, why don't you just do that? Well, why do you need anything else? Well, if you take CID times RPM divided by 1728 times 2 times 8, you get a really low CFM number. It's unusable. It's, you'll get, if you've got a head that flows 300 CFM, and you're looking at a CFM number down here that's maybe 97, that's unusable. It doesn't give you any good information. And that's why we don't just do the basic thing. That's why CFM demand gets used by headquarters, because it's supposed to equate out to what you actually see in flow from the cylinder head and how it equates to the motor. That's the whole purpose of CFM demand. And that's what I've shown in the previous video, where I actually kind of broke it down and made it work using this formula. But like I said, this formula is not right. And if I use just the 1728 and the 2 and the 8, the CFM isn't right. So there's something else in there. There's something else generating that constant. And that is what's thrown people. And so I was really looking at this, and I knew number-wise this worked. So I had to be missing something here. Now, I have to have the 1728 in there, because I have to convert cubic inches to cubic feet. And I have to have the 2 and I have to have the 8. So what else goes in there that affects the CFM? And that's when it dawned on me. It's a matter of time. If you calculate this, it's giving you the CFM flow average. It's over the entire 2 rotations of the motor. But that's not how an engine breathes. If you look, the engine only breathes for a chunk of the entire rotation. It's not doing 720 degrees worth of breathing. It's only doing whatever the cam duration is. And that is where the problem comes in. We need to have this entire airflow, this entire amount of flow from the cubic inch size of the motor at the given RPM. We have to have enough airflow to completely fill that cylinder in this amount of time. And I talked about some of this in volumetric efficiency. So that's when it occurred to me, it's a matter of time. So in the formula, I decided to add in time. Now, if I added in degrees, that brings me an odd number out here, because I'm adding degrees into this. Degrees doesn't exist. So I have to stay in either volume or time, because in this, that's all I have. I have cubic inches and I have time, revolutions per minute. So I have to stay in those two things to make this formula work. So in order to figure out the time, I used inertia ramp. Now, I don't think they had that back when this formula was actually designed, so I'm not sure what they used to actually generate it, but it has to be basically the same idea, because that's the only way this actually works. And so by taking a Z of 1, which is technically 100% volumetric efficiency, I've said before, this is like a 256 cam. So if I take 256 degrees out of 720, I can find out what kind of value I have. How much of that 720 time am I actually open? Because I can't do just a given time amount, because RPM keeps changing. That keeps changing the actual length of time. So I have to get it in a percentage. So basically, a 256 cam calculated into 720 degrees of rotation and figured out into a percentage comes out to 35.5% of the time that the valve is open. So in that given 35.5% of rotation, I need to move the entire amount of air. I'm not moving it over the entire 720 2 rotations. I'm moving it in 1/3 of that time period. So technically, that's basically tripling the number. So in order to get a proper number, I multiplied 1728 times 35.5, because that's the percentage of time that I'm going to be open. So I reduce the time, which increases the airflow because it's over a shorter period of time. And what that gave me was 614.9. Oh my God, 614. No wonder that worked. That worked for all the wrong reasons. When I redid this formula, I chose Mach 0.55, which is 614 feet per minute, or feet per second. And that number is what I plugged in over here. It was pure coincidence that that actually made it work, because it has nothing to do with airspeed. It's just I happened to hit the correct number that made that work. And because that worked, I then started looking at this as to why. Why did that work when it shouldn't? Well, that's because I just stumbled across the number. It's not airspeed, it's time. It's 35.5% of the time. And that's added in at the bottom, and I just happened to multiply it times the 1728 that I know I needed to convert CID and RPM. It had to be there. It wasn't there in this, and I'm like, it can't be missing. Why does that work? So once I did that, I wound up at the same number I was using here, which is why that worked. And so then we have basically CID times RPM divided by the same 614.28 that I have up there. It's really 1728 times 35.5% times 2 times 8. Okay? That changes this to the CFM flow that you're going to see at the given time. Now, I used 100% VE. I figured that was the best place to start because I wanted to completely fill this. And so that comes out, if I convert it to a numeric like this, basically you just take all of this together, 1728 times 35.5, or actually it's 0.355, because we're multiplying a percentage. So times 2 times 8, okay? That then gets divided into 1. Remember, when I was talking about this formula, that's what this 1 was doing way out there. Is when you divide a number into 1, it comes out to the reverse. I can move it to the top with a constant. And the constant I come out with is 0.0008143. And you're like, well, wait a minute, that's not the same number as what's up there. That can't be right. Remember, I used a Z of 1. I'm working on 100% volumetric efficiency. Part of the reason I think this didn't work is because it seems to come out when we do other math to like 120% volumetric efficiency. And in fact, some of the books talk about the fact, well, that's the maximum amount of air. Well, I have talked in the video on volumetric efficiency. That's not really how volumetric efficiency works. That's part of the reason I chose to do 100% VE, not 120, is because it's really about time in making VE, not about the flow. And the number we're trying to get here is about the flow we see on the cylinder head, or the flow we need out of the cylinder head to hit a particular motor to a particular RPM. You know, I've got a 427 and I want to go to 8,500 RPM. What do I need in flow? Where do I got to be? That's what this formula is about. And that's not about volumetric efficiency, which is what I said in volume 2 of this particular series, now a series. It's not about that. That's about time. So if you're wondering, well, that means that what I'm doing is probably bogus. It is not. If you take that number into that number, you divide 0009785 by 0008143, you get 1.207, it goes out a little bit. But you basically get 120% VE, which is what we have always felt like this did, because it basically said that's what you need to make sure that you completely fill the motor. And that's why it was always off a little bit. That's why this version seemed like it worked better when I showed the demonstration in the previous video about engine design. So the new value that you should be using is actually this 8143, 0.0008143. This takes this formula and makes it 100% VE instead of 120% VE. Now, if you want, for some reason, to look at some other VE, which I'm not sure I understand why, but should you want to, you can just multiply this times whatever. If you take this times 120, you'll come up with a new value that you can plug in. If you multiply it times, 0.80 for 80% volumetric efficiency, it would work at that too. Now, I'm not sure why you would do that. It's probably better to do it after the fact, partly because this is going to affect RPM if you change this value. And in reality, the RPM on volumetric efficiency isn't going to change, just the fill of the cylinder, which, like I said, I talked about in the VE video. And so this makes more sense, and it's why this formula, which is number-wise the same as this formula, it's just this one gives us an explanation of why. And it makes perfect sense if you think about it. This is about the CFM flow given the displacement and the RPM that you're going to see on the actual engine based on the fill of the cylinder. Not the volumetric, but the time. How long it has to move this amount of air. So they may have not used the Z like I did, the inertia RAM formula was probably not used. They may have had some other way to come up with the percentage, but it basically means the same thing. And that's why this formula had nothing to do with the stuff that was in this formula. This is completely wrong. This is out to lunch. He probably did his best to justify the constant, but I said in that video, he was working backwards. That's the way the math read, is somebody working backwards to get to a constant instead of a constant being generated from practical information. And so this is useless. Just don't even follow it. This paper the guy wrote is just wrong. You know, and I'm sorry. He probably did his best, but it's just not correct. This is really how it works. And I know it because it's elegant. It doesn't make an awkward constant. It doesn't make an awkward formula. It makes sense as to what it is. It's a simple formula. It's a simple idea just to get an idea of how much CFM you are going to see you need from the standpoint of your flow bench in order to make it work. And by going to 100% and it working correctly, like I showed in the previous, that just says to me that I am correct in how volumetric efficiency works. And like I said, back in the day, we used to be told all the time, well, you need more airflow to increase volumetric efficiency. Well, it doesn't work that way because it's really about inertia RAM. It's really about airspeed and timing. It's not really about airflow, the mass amount of flow. You increase the CFM, you increase the RPM. Or you increase the CFM, you increase the CID. And that's why it's important to know what the formula says. That's why it's bothered everybody as to what does this constant actually say. Because this was reduced to that, and we didn't know what was in it. And if it wasn't for this guy arguing the point and me looking at this stuff and an accident on what I chose up here, I would not have figured this out. You know, this whole thing has been a month-long adventure in getting to the bottom of this and making it work. And the nice thing is now that I have done that, I know it's kind of mathy, but I'm kind of giddy. Suddenly this piece fits in correctly with the thinking on volumetric efficiency and in inertia RAM. It wasn't forced. It makes sense for even the original one as to what they were doing. It's not convoluted. The problem with this is this was convoluted. He was trying too hard to justify what the constant was. This is simple. This is unbelievably simple. That's part of what makes it right. This is so simple, this had to be how it goes. And I have no doubt this is how it works. And so you can see that this number is basically just generating where mechanically, you have X amount of CID at a given RPM, you need X amount of flow. Once you're done, it's the same old saying we've said, you have flat run out of air. When you're fussing around with camshaft and you're fussing around with other stuff, now remember, camshaft sometimes gives you lift. Lift gives you CFM. CFM gives you extra RPM. And so you start to see why a cam may affect the RPM, because it's really about what lift did you go to and what flow did you get. If you start looking at volumetric efficiency, you start realizing it's really about the closing point, it's really about the inertia RAM, it's really about the airspeed generated in the intake. And so you start putting these pieces together to realize how an engine actually functions. And this is simple and elegant, and this is the way that was derived. They may have used something else to figure the percentage, but it's basically got to be time-based, because that's the only thing that fits this formula. The rest of this, if you try and change what's going on, you're just making a mess of the formula. And so this is the solution. This is how the CFM demand constant came to be. Now, as to what constant you want to use, if you insist on using 120%, that's fine. I feel that's wrong. This says that's wrong. It's really about something else. So I would be using 0008143 and then figure your volumetric efficiency after the fact. That puts the RPM correct, and then you can adjust the CFM according to volumetric efficiency as to how much power you're going to make. You're still going to flow that much CFM in the head. It's just about whether or not you cut it short and so you only get 80% of it, or if you carry it out and use the inertia to get 120% of it. That's all this is. The CFM is still going to be the same in the head no matter what, which is why you're better off at 100% volumetric efficiency. And so that's the CFM demand. That I was using will work numerically, but my explanation of it is wrong. And that's where this journey has taken me. It's kind of just a mathy thing that everything needs to add up to get the right type of number out. Not the right number, the right type. Because we have to generate CFM. It has to be cubic inches, cubic feet, or minutes. We can't put anything else in there without changing what this is. And so that's how it goes, and I'm very happy with what I've figured out in actually a fairly short period of time. And technically, I think this guy, even though he was wrong, even though he was rough to deal with, this led me on the path. This was wrong, but this got me going down the path. Otherwise, I would have just done the original CFM demand, called it good, moved on, kept using it like I did. Now I have another piece that actually fits into the big puzzle and works with everything else that I see. And so I have gained something out of this whole deal about how this works. And I am very happy about that. This was well worth the journey, even though you went through it with me and saw some of the pitfalls. You can be led astray by math. And that's what happened here. If you work backwards, you can be led astray. That's why I didn't take the 614 and try and figure it out. I tried to figure out what the math needed. And then I got giddy when I came out with 614.9. And like I said, I know that's a geeky math thing. But the fact that in my first thought process, it worked out and it hit the same number that I had been using and made work was like, oh my God, my thinking's right. Hallelujah. So that's how it goes. That's CFM demand. This is part 3. That's the breakdown of what that constant is. It is really a conversion from cubic inches to cubic feet, a percentage of the time that the camshaft is actually open, a conversion on RPM to cut it in half because of cycles, and a conversion from CID to a single cylinder to give us the CFM flow that we're expected to see. And I have run it. This is the same numbers. If you want to see more, if I need to take a few engines and show that this works better, we can do that. Put something in the comments and I'll look at that. my previous video on that is basically the same thing. But now we know really what's driving it in something that's much more elegant than that with this wrong thing stuck in it. So, well, like I said, let me know in the comments. I am very comfortable with where we're at. This is a big piece to drop in. And this is a piece that I talked to Stan West, I've talked to other people. Nobody knew where that came from. So I am very happy that I figured it out and I know how this works. And I did it with something that makes real sense and fits the formula. I am kind of proud of myself. Sorry. I know, we're not supposed to have that kind of ego. So I wish you luck on all your projects. I advise you to actually use this constant as opposed to this constant, but at least now you understand what's generating it. And I hope everything goes well in the new year coming up. And I will talk to you later and we'll do another video. Like I said, let me know in the comments if I need to go over something, if I need to use the formula and show more about what actually happens with a motor. We can break down a few dyno runs and see what actually happens, where the power is coming from. Because I'm a big believer in knowing what's generating your horsepower. That's part of the reason for this. And this is now even more accurate to show you that the engine has limits. And this is one of them. It just can only move so much air, and you've got to plan around that at the given CID and RPM that you can function with. So, have a good day, and we'll do another video down the road. Talk to you later. Bye.